We're live.
We're live. Welcome to the new school year.
Wow. It's been the new school year for a while though. So
it has. We kind of started in July. Here we are almost in October, but
it's fine.
Don't call us slackers. We're back before October. It is still September, and we're very excited to be here with you all for our Ag Issues webinar series. I'm Katie Akins.
I'm Chelsea McGuire, and we are the dream team here today.
That's what we call ourselves anyways. Yeah.
We're the only ones who call ourselves that. But
you be the judge. You be the judge. But I am very excited to talk about the topic that we're diving into today. And so happy that we have Chelsea here with us, who has been working and is underwater, so to speak, in this topic. So perfect person. So thank you for joining us again.
Of course.
I'm sure everybody who's listening along with me keeps hearing all the news and all the stories and the interviews about how the Colorado River is running dry and we're running out of water, and that there's something about these tier 1 shortages. Can you tell us exactly what that means?
Yeah.
And what this is all about?
Yeah, that's right. It's been all over the news, and I think maybe I'm a little bit biased in saying that because we've just been so inundated with media requests.
You're drowning.
I am. The next time I have to play like that 2 truths and a lie, one of my truths is going to be that I've been interviewed twice by the Weather Channel.
I'm gonna say that's a lie because it's probably more than that.
It's only twice.
Oh, it is twice. Okay.
Still, it's it's truth, but it's crazy.
Not many people can say that.
Yeah, really, right? But anyway, yeah, so in a nutshell, what we're talking about right now in Arizona is this. There isn't enough water in the Colorado River to meet all of the demands that we have for water coming out of that river. So that means that someone is not going to get the water that they need. And the reason that agriculture and Farm Bureau in particular has been so inundated with questions about this is because that someone is Central Arizona's farmers.
Doesn't seem very fair.
You know, we would agree with that, and we'll definitely kind of get to that in a little bit. And before I go too much farther, I forgot to say we do have the Q&A open and we have the chat open. So if you have questions as you're watching along with us live, feel free to jump in.
Excellent. Yes.
I've got them here on my screen. I can see them all. So Katie, we agree. Doesn't really seem fair that Arizona farmers the first ones to lose the water off of the river. And so let's explain kind of how we got there and why that is the case. This chart looks super confusing. I promise it's actually not as confusing as it seems, but it all starts in the 1950s with, as all good stories start, a Supreme Court case. And that Supreme Court case settled how much water the lower basin of the Colorado River, which means Arizona, California, and Nevada, are entitled to use. So through that case, Arizona received an allotment of 2.8 million acre feet of water. And again, if you're following along with us, you know that an acre foot is as much water as it takes to cover an acre with a foot of water. Imagine a football field covered in a foot of water. That's what we're talking about.
There you go. Okay, done. I was going to ask all the things and you just did it.
She's been rubbing off on me, guys. I'm getting better at this. All right. So Arizona got 2.8 million acre feet. Then Arizona itself had to divvy up all of that water among the people who wanted it, right? So they had to say, okay, these people have been using it. These people need it. This is what we're doing. And in Arizona, we have, it's a very complicated system as all kind of water logistics are. But in generally, remember that surface water is first in time, first in right. So if you're taking water out of a river, the first people to use it get to use it first and the most, and the last people to use it get to use it last and the least. Kind of they have to take what's left over, right?
Even if they were there first?
Well, they weren't there first.
Well, I guess that's true.
Yeah.
I guess.
So there you go. So, so on the left side of the screen, this is going to show the folks that were there first. We call these our main stem users or on-river users. They're the first guys in Arizona that started using water from the Colorado River because they're along the Colorado River. So they didn't have to have a ton of infrastructure to actually get that water where they needed it to go to use it. So they have the most senior right to use this water. So think of the river like filling a bucket. The bottom of the bucket gets filled first, right? So these guys are at the very bottom of the bucket. They're getting water first, even if there's not enough to make it all the way to the top, they get theirs. That's right. Okay. Exactly. Now, this gray box at the top of that priority 4 includes the Central Arizona Project. And they were the last ones to use the water. So if you know what the CAP Canal is, right, it's that more than 300-mile canal that goes from the river to central Arizona, ends in Tucson. And so they were the last ones to use Colorado River water because the canal didn't always exist, right? It wasn't actually delivering water until the 80s. And so they are the most junior users of that water. And the right side of our chart tells us of all the folks who are taking water out of the canal, the CAP, this is what their priorities look like.
So I'm assuming that orange ag pool is referring to our farmers.
That is absolutely correct. And ironically enough, that NIA also used to refer to farmers because it stands for non-Indian agriculture. Through multiple settlements and agreements and things, that water now basically goes to all tribal agriculture. So it is the opposite of what it is named. I don't know why they didn't just rename it in the chart, but it's fine. Yes, so that orange box, the ag pool, that is surface water that farmers in central Arizona and specifically farmers in Pinal County rely on for about half of the water that they use to grow their crops. So about half of it is coming from the CAP, a little more than half in some years, and then about the rest of it, about half is coming from groundwater pumping.
So as we look on that right side, is it the same as the other? What if the bottom of the chart is the bottom of our bucket?
That's exactly right.
So ag pool's high,
yes,
which is why we're where we are.
That's right.
Okay.
Ag pool's high, which is why we're where we are. There are some other reasons for that too. I mean, like I said, that gray box, that NIA priority also used to be agricultural. In 2004, there was another set of legal cases, another court settlement that moved around and shifted some of these priorities. And there were a couple of things that went into that. Farmers in Pinal County, one, couldn't afford CAP water at the rates that they had been getting it. And it was making it cost prohibitive to use it. So, you know, it didn't really matter if they had the priority to use it, they couldn't afford to use it. There were also quite a few tribal litigations going on that didn't involve farmers necessarily, but were over stream adjudication and who of the Indian tribes and reservations got to use water versus cities getting to use water. That was getting really, really ugly. And one of the good ways to settle that was to find water from somewhere else, to sort of say, here's more water in place. Maybe we can stop fighting over this water because we have this water instead. And so agriculture came to the table and said, look, we're going to be willing to give up our priority to some of that water in exchange for getting the water we can now have at a lower pumping rate, at a lower cost.
Okay.
And you guys can settle these lawsuits that are going to cost you a whole lot more money than it would be to just give us this lower cost. And we just want to make sure that we have access to this water until 2030. So all of that kind of went on in 2004, which is how we got really to the situation that we're in right now.
Because we're not to 2030 yet.
We're not to 2030 yet.
But they're losing water.
That's right. So remember, all of these numbers, all of the 2004 assumptions, those were based on good hydrology. They were based on a river under, I guess, quote unquote, normal conditions. Some would argue they were actually wetter conditions than normal would look like. And so we assumed there was going to be enough water to go around and to meet all of these obligations. But as we now know, that won't always be the case. And in fact, today it is not the case. But that didn't necessarily surprise anybody. Right? So we sort of saw this coming. We did see this coming. And in 2019, the lower basin states, the ones, we have 3 states we mentioned before, they entered into an agreement known as the Drought Contingency Plan, or DCP. We talked about this, I think, on a webinar before. I'm sure that was another big buzz that was kind of happening in the news when it happened. And so the point of DCP was to essentially, we're going to anticipate there are going to be shortages in the river, and we're going to get everyone to agree to use less water. And the point of that isn't to necessarily stave off that shortage and prevent that shortage. It's to stop the shortage from becoming catastrophic.
So did the DCP define what shortage was?
It does. And these are the tiers that we keep hearing about. So we keep hearing we're at a tier 1 shortage. What that refers to is a certain level of water in Lake Mead. Lake Mead is a reservoir of the Colorado River. It is where which dam is located, Katie?
I'm sorry, I was reading something. Totally missed it.
We multitask here too, guys.
We're really bad. Sorry.
What's the dam of Lake Mead? What dam created Lake Mead?
You put me on the spot, so I'm gonna say Roosevelt.
Hoover.
Oh shoot, Hoover.
Roosevelt created.
He was cool
Roosevelt.
too.
He was cool. He
Hoover
was
cool too.
definitely so. If you ever get a chance to go to see that, it is truly a
I've
feat.
been to the Hoover Dam.
I'm sorry. I caught you off guard. Now I feel
That's like
bad.
a horseshoe bend and the Antelope Canyon. You should go and do the Hoover Dam.
Very impressive.
Yeah, okay.
Very, very cool. Sorry, minor. We just got sidetracked. It's our first one back.
It's Monday.
It's Monday. It's a very Monday. All right. So the tiers that we're referring to are the levels at Lake Mead created by Hoover Dam. And this is the elevation of the lake. So in tier 0, we're at 1,090 feet to 1075. Tier 1 is below 1075. And so as we get lower, we get into more and more tiers. And the lower tier, I guess the higher number of the tier that we're at, the more water we lose, okay? So in tier 0, which is where we were up until 2021, we were losing a little bit of that ag pool. We were making up for it with some other water, so it wasn't really a huge impact. At tier 1, so starting January 1st, 2022, we lose the entirety of that ag pool.
How much water does that mean? Like, what are we losing?
In total, Arizona is going to lose access to about 512 acre feet. The ag pool itself is only 300,000 acre feet. So overnight, we lose it all.
Okay. So literally overnight, Pinal County is losing half of the water that it uses for agriculture because it's losing all of its CFP water.
That is accurate.
Where does that take us?
That's exactly the face that a lot of us are making, right?
That's huge.
Yeah.
So what does that mean?
So what that means is that instead of doing what we had planned to do, which is we had that 2030 date, right? Where we said by then we're probably not going to have access to this water anymore. So we're gonna,
9 years from now.
9 years from now,
okay.
Right? We're going to transition really gradually to the use of groundwater and groundwater exclusively. And we were going to do that in quite a few ways, right? It could have been cropping patterns. It could have been irrigation technology. For some folks, it was going to mean you're selling that agricultural land that's in prime development places to now be in development. And so you're just not using agricultural water at all. But, Katie, you and I are both parents. We are saving up for college for our kids at some point. If someone came up to me and said, just kidding, Sadie has to go to college tomorrow, I would not be ready for that. So it's kind of the same situation, right? Where we knew it was coming, but it's coming way sooner than we had any reason to anticipate. And so now we're having to rely exclusively on that groundwater infrastructure stuff that might not be there yet. But ultimately, there's not going to be a perfect way to make up for the water that Pinal County is losing. And so we're probably looking at something like 30 to 50% of current farmland in that county just going out of production, not having the water there to actually put a crop on it or sustain a crop on it. So it's just going to be fallow.
So I can't pretend like that's not a big deal because
right.
I teach about how important agriculture is in all the counties, but let's look at it from a standpoint of somebody who's not involved in agriculture. And what about their comments of, well, it's just one county though.
Mm-hmm.
It's just Pinal County, right? We can make up for it in other places, right? We've got more than one county here in Arizona.
Right.
So what could the conversation look like for them?
It's tempting for me to just want to be able to say like, oh yeah, we're good. There are 14 other counties in the state.
Right, 15,
we can transition somewhere else. Unfortunately, the numbers just don't support that. The numbers definitely tell us otherwise in terms of Pinal County being a powerhouse in agriculture. The way I like to put it, even though I think I've maybe watched 2 boxing matches in my life, is that Pinal punches above its weight class when it comes to agricultural production. So it's in the top 2% nationwide in terms of the total value of agricultural sales, 2% nationwide, which just shows you how much agriculture impacts that county and how much production comes out of that county, right? Because you got to have something to sell to make up that 2%. Cotton and milk sales in particular are really, really key to that county. It's in the top 1% nationwide for both of those sales. It's also in the top 1% nationwide for cattle inventory, because you got to have a lot of cows in the county to actually make all that dairy. Also a thriving feedlot in that county, which gives us a lot of our beef here. Then it has an alfalfa industry that supports a lot of those cattle being in the county, and makes sense for those cattle to be there close to their feed, where you're not paying a lot of transportation costs to get the feed to the cattle. Also makes it a much more sustainable crop because you're not paying for that fuel or using that fuel, right? So all of it's really, really integrated in terms of what happens there in Pinal County. And remember too, the numbers that you're seeing here, these, $2.8 million in cattle and calves, $2.6 million in dairy, those just reflect on-farm sales. So they're not showing the integration of agriculture in the community at large, which is, jobs, exactly. Food processing is really big in Pinal County. There's a daisy plant there with sour cream. There's a plant there that makes dairy desserts and yogurts. Food manufacturing actually provides about 25% of the county's manufacturing jobs overall, and 18% of those are from dairy alone. So you see how it really all connects, and it's a big Jenga tower, and you can't just continue pulling the stocks out of agriculture and expect that the rest of it on the top in terms of manufacturing and jobs and all of that is going to continue to exist. So it's really likely that without all that, these things aren't going to continue to exist. And so in 2018, 2018, 19, anyway, 18. There was a study, came out of 19. U of A did a study to say, how big is that Jenga tower really in Pinal County? And they came out with $2.3 billion in sales and economic impact of Pinal County agriculture to the county. So that's huge, right? To one county in the state. It adds $611 million in value added, which economists have explained to me is kind of like a county gross domestic product. So that's obviously showing some real prosperity in that county too. And then 7,500 jobs. And that's all because agriculture exists there. Without it, wouldn't be there.
So what happened, or what is happening to those 7,500 jobs now that water is not there?
Yeah.
And agriculture might be looking a little different.
So U of A also projected that in that same study that they did in 2018. And so we don't know exactly yet, because it's still yet to kind of come into play, and we've got to have a few months and a few years probably to see the full impact. But their estimations there determine that the hypothetical economic impact, right, we're going to be pretty catastrophic too. About $63 to $66 million lost just in sales. So that's not talking those multiplier effects, right? About close to $100 million in loss in total county sales. We're talking, that gross domestic county product, about $35 million, and then losing hundreds of jobs, 270 to 480 full and part-time jobs lost, kind of overnight, like we've said.
So tell us that there's something in the works that are going to help our people there.
See, farmers are nothing if not innovative, right?
Very true.
And so, yes, there are many things in the works. None of them are perfect solutions. There is no such thing as a perfect solution to this other than just rain in the right places at the right time. Yeah. And, I spend a lot of my time explaining to people what lobbyists do, and how what lobbyists do is not paying people off to vote in certain ways. But if there is someone out there I can pay off to make it rain, could y'all find that phone number for me?
We'll make an exception.
I'll consider it. I will. I'll consider it. We'll see. There's not. I've looked. Anyway,
that Queen Creek rainwater to go right. to Casa Grande.
That's right.
Other places.
Something like that. So, right. But yes, there is mitigation, right? And that was a big part of the discussions that led up to agreeing to the drought contingency plan, because we realized that we couldn't let all of this burden fall on one county at one time. It wasn't fair. It was going to be catastrophic to the county, to the state, to the 43% of the dairy that comes from that county, right? All of those things. And so one of the biggest, I guess not biggest, but one of the most immediate parts of that mitigation was wet water mitigation, which, just as the term implies, is actual water that can be delivered through that CAP canal that theoretically more senior users would have had the right to use. But they've said, we're willing to let this flow down to the farmers in Pinal County because we realize that they need it. Now they're losing, remember, 300,000 acre feet. This wet water is about 105,000 acre feet, which, you know, something is better than nothing. That's always a good thing. But there's a couple limitations to that. The first is that if you don't have enough to grow a crop, you don't have enough to grow a crop. And if you need 4 acre feet and you only have 2, and someone says, well, I can give you 3, you still don't have 4. And
right.
So there's still going to be, you know, a level of production that gets eliminated because of that. The other sort of hiccup to that is that it only lasts until 2022. So the drought contingency plan said it would last from 2020 to 2022. We didn't need it in 20 or 21. So there's only 1 year left of it, and that's in 2022. So
and that's quickly approaching.
Yeah, it's next year.
Mean,
so basically, yeah, you get 1 year as a Pinal County farmer, 1 year of wet water mitigation coming through that. Because the idea was, you know, we'll have it for 3 years, which gives them some time to build up some of this other stuff. Now we're only in 22, and we have not yet had the time to build that out. And that brings us to the second point, which is that other stuff, and that's groundwater infrastructure improvements. You know, we've talked about what we're going to have to do now is transition over to almost an exclusive reliance on groundwater. That's nothing necessarily new to the county, but it's been very different since the 1980s when surface water got introduced. And so their groundwater infrastructure, one, has not kept up because it hasn't needed to. The whole point of bringing CAP there was that we didn't have to use groundwater because we didn't like to do that. It's not as sustainable. It's not the best solution, but now it's our only option. So what we're going to have to do is make sure that they can pump enough of that groundwater and get it where it needs to go. Because surface water moves very differently than groundwater because there's a lot of pressure involved in surface water that you're not paying to create because it's gravity. Any groundwater pressure you have to pay to create through electricity and pumping. And so it's going to be much harder to get water all the way to the edges of your districts than it is when you have surface water there to do it. So that's going to be a really extensive project. It's going to cost about $50 million.
Where's that money coming from?
A lot of different places. Some of it's coming from irrigation districts itself. And if you're not familiar with what an irrigation district is, it's basically the managing entity that says, okay, here's all the water and we're going to get it where it needs to go, where it's entitled to go. They are a sort of quasi-governmental agency in that they have the authority to tax the people who live in their district to pay for the infrastructure, the canals, the pumps, the ditches, all of that stuff to get water where it needs to go. So they're putting up about $5 million of that. It'll be more than that when all is said and done, but that was sort of the number that they have committed to, so to speak. The state put up about $9 million, just outright said, here's $9 million from our general fund that can go to this project. The folks that manage the CAP Canal, which is the Central Arizona Water Conservation District, they put up $5 million as well, recognizing, you know, these are their customers. So, you know, we're getting there kind of slowly but surely, but that we're not at 50 yet, right? And so the next steps that the irrigation districts and the folks who live in those districts have taken is to work to find that money from other sources. We were really, really encouraged this year by the budget that the state passed because within that budget, we were able to work some things around to use some of the money that came in from the federal government through COVID relief for things like better water infrastructure and improving communities. About $20 million is going to go to our districts through that, which is huge and actually allows some of these projects to start and to get off the ground. But they're also continuing to work with federal agencies like the Natural Resources Conservation Service to say, look, this is truly a conservation project. We're doing this to leave water at Lake Mead, to leave water on the Colorado River and be as efficient with the water that we have here as possible. What are some programs that we can use? And so we're continuing to have those discussions and working very, very hard to have those discussions and figure out where can we get this money because we've got to get it from somewhere.
So I did the math there. We're at 39 out of 50.
Yeah.
So still works to be done. Still working, but I mean, that's a big chunk.
Yeah, it's a big chunk. And so it's definitely getting them closer to the point where, like I've said, we can start to get some of these projects off the ground. And that way we're not waiting until 4 years from now, right, to start drilling new wells and improving infrastructure and that kind of thing. But ultimately, like, let's even say that this is a project that we could just flip a switch and it's ready tomorrow. there's just complications to that, right? Like we said, groundwater is not a perfect solution. We don't love to use groundwater. And also, there are just ways we can't get enough groundwater, even if we could pump all of it, right, to the crops. And so ultimately, this is going to come down to farmers as individual business owners, as families, making decisions about what it's feasible to grow with the new realities, the new hydrology, what crops are profitable, what crops are low water use, what makes sense. And those are going to be very individual decisions. That's one of the things that's been kind of hard, I think, to convey in the media, because we're talking these really big picture numbers and countywide and all of this. But at the end of the day, every farm is going to say, here's how much land I have, here's how much water I have, here's what I need to do to stay in business until next year. How am I going to make that happen? And those are complicated decisions. Those are going to depend on even more than water, right? They're going to depend on commodity markets, which is another thing we can't control. They're going to depend on all sorts of things. And so those are sort of like the things that are harder to encapsulate and talk about, which is why we're really thankful when any of our farmers are sort of willing to get in front of a TV.
And we love that our farmers, I mean, they are and always have been, they roll with the punches, right?
Very
and
much so.
they're intuitive. They do amazing things to get out of circumstances that are presented to them. But I mean, we know that no matter how efficient you come, you still need a minimum amount of water.
Yeah.
And if that minimum amount of water to grow those crops isn't there, there's just not going to be crops in the ground, right?
That's right. There just can't be. And so ultimately, no matter how innovative we are, no matter what we do to figure out how to survive to the next year, that's going to look like some people just not planting. And maybe that means wholesale farming operations going out of business. Maybe it just means that farms are cutting back portions of what they grow, but you're going to see fallow fields in Pinal County. There's just no way around that.
Well, I know one of the things I would love to bring up, because people are always going to say, well, what kind of crops could go there that are sort of low water use but could still be profitable? And I know there's some testing going on in the county of some crops. You know which one I'm talking about specifically, right?
I do.
Share it with them.
So Kate's talking about Waiuli, which starts with a G, believe it or not.
It is not phonetically spelled. I tried to Google it and it came up all wrong.
So Waiuli is an alternative rubber plant, and it's not new necessarily. It's been around for several decades, but it's been sort of grown with varying levels of success in different places across the nation. And so as we have companies that are looking to be more sustainable overall, to lower their carbon footprint, their water footprint, and frankly, find new products, right, that are just easier to grow and more controllable and more sustainable, there's some folks that are really investing some time and effort into Waiuli. If it works, awesome. It's still going to be a while before we figure out if it does. And even if it does, is there a market that's there to sustain the rest of the industry in Pinal County? Possibly. Hemp was one that we talked about for a really long time. And I think there's some folks that still are, but it's another one that's relatively untested as of right now. We don't know whether it's going to grow well in Pinal County. Some folks have had some real trouble growing it there because it is so warm, because it is so dry. So we don't have a silver bullet. And I think even those crops that people are looking to and saying, well, why don't you just grow something that's water conserved, or that's, water efficient? Okay, that's great. It has to work and someone has to want to buy it.
Yeah, a market for it.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then that also doesn't take into account the fact of that integration of the agricultural industry. So let's say every alfalfa acre in Pinal County tomorrow could ostensibly and feasibly and sustainably move to something else that takes less water. Then what feeds the dairy cattle? And then when we can't feed the dairy cattle, where do we get our dairy? And are we importing that from another state or another nation? What's the carbon footprint of that? I think it's really tempting to talk about sustainability as sort of a county level thing of you're seeing one crop and it's being grown and you think there's a crop that could use less water. That may be true. That doesn't mean that that's not a sustainable crop for other reasons. And you have to take into account the integration and look at sustainability on a statewide level, on a nationwide level, and say, are we growing the right things in the right places even if that means we're not growing something that can take less water.
Right. Big picture.
Big picture.
Okay. So this is a deep issue. I'm trying to think of a lot of other water puns.
You're doing good so far.
I need a raft. So, okay. We've talked, this is our third time talking about water, right?
Yes.
There are so many components. So can you lay out how might let's say an ag issues team, FFA, high school, how might they tackle this as an issue? What is the question that's not necessarily a yes or no to?
Yes.
What?
Yeah.
Help me help them.
It's not a good issues webinar if you can't make a Jerry Maguire reference.
Right. Show me the money. Water. Show me the water.
So kind of staying on the theme that we were just talking about in terms of big picture, that's where I would take this. Because even if you're a high school in Pinal County, looking at you, CGUHS, my old alma mater, even if you're there, every kind of the questions are very fact-based, right? And so it's hard to ask something that's not yes or no because it is or it isn't, right? We are losing water or we're not. It can't really be a question of should we because we're going to, right? So what I would do instead is back away and take it from an even bigger picture. It could be something along the lines of, should farmers be required to grow different crops that are lower water use? And you could kind of talk about the integration there. But even a step back from that, I would say, let's look at the way we've managed water in our state, where we've treated agriculture as sort of our savings account for water, so that when we're short, we take out from that savings account. And let's talk about that. Let's talk about whether that is the best way for us to manage water in our state and why. Because that is a much more, it's a more nuanced question. It allows you to explore it from multiple angles that are not necessarily right or wrong, depending on what position that you're coming from. Because you can look at the yes and you should say, hey, residential, municipal, industrial development, that's the highest value use of water. If you're talking about growing your state, growing the economic prosperity of your state, the jobs aren't necessarily in production ag. The jobs are at Intel. The jobs are, there. And then those folks that work at Intel need to live in a house that's near to Intel, and they need to send their kids to a school that's near Intel. That's where the water needs to go. The other kind of aspect of that is to say also water is the largest user of agriculture is the largest user of water in the state. So, hey, you low hanging fruit, right? You take from that. That's probably one that's a bad example because I can debunk that.
It almost came out of nowhere.
That's kind of the thought process behind that, right? Like the reason we use it as the savings account is because you can use it as the savings account. It's such a big user. But the no side of that talks about that integration of agriculture in economies and counties and states where it's located. It talks about food security. We just came off of COVID, right? We just came off of the kind of experience Americans have never had before, walking to a grocery store and not seeing what you expected to see and not seeing the product that you wanted to buy. That was a massive shock to the system. And if we don't want that sort of thing to happen on a regular basis, we have to have resilient local food sources. And if we don't have water, we can't have that. And so really exploring the role that local ag plays in food security, and then taking that step back to what role does global and nationwide agriculture play in the sustainability question, I think makes this a much more interesting issue breakdown where you can just do a lot with it.
I'm sort of visualizing the script, the role play that happens in the ag issues thing. And I'm, on that no side, I'm thinking somebody who's like, who COVID went to the grocery store and the shelves were empty and they had a hard time getting the things that they needed because of that. I'm seeing a farmer on there. I'm seeing somebody from all these acronyms that you've been throwing out through this whole ag webinar, right? Maybe you can even play Chelsea McGuire. I mean, people play Katie Akins in the scripts before, which is always so fun to watch. So I think you should play Chelsea some way, somehow in this one.
Thanks for planting that seed.
You're welcome.
So yeah, that's where I would go with it. That's how I would coach a team, to make it something that's not necessarily so fact driven and make it something that is policy wide. What do we want to look like as a state and how do we get there?
I like that. I like that. Thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
And we will go ahead and we will put the recording of this up on the website like we usually do. I'm going to email it out. So if you're seeing this after the fact, hi, that'll be there. And then I know that we have an amazing page with water resources that you have put together on the advocacy side.
It
and
is
so
at azfb.org/water-makes-food, and it'll be updated regularly, but we're pretty proud of that page right now. So
water makes food and sort of everything else. So, yeah, so great resources that will be up there that will maybe allow you just to understand the issue a little bit more or dive a little deeper to bring this back around in spring at our contests. So
I'm excited. I really do hope that some of you guys embrace this topic because it is what policymakers are talking about right now. It is consuming so much of my time on the advocacy side of things. And frankly, I would love to see some new perspectives. So hit us with your best shot. Show us what you got.
And if you are not watching this live, so you don't have the opportunity to submit those questions, but you do have a question after tuning in with us, shoot us an email. You guys all have our emails. It's our name. So mine's Katie Akins at azfb.org.
Mine's Chelsea McGuire at azfb.org.
If you go to azfb.org, you will find our contact information there. So you can reach out to us with any questions that you have regarding the webinar today, or if you want to tackle this as an issue as part of your ag issues with your team there at school, reach out and we'll help you the best that we can. But definitely appreciate you tuning in. Chelsea, thank you so much for your knowledge on water. Again, I can't believe this is really the third time we're talking water, and I don't think it's going to be the last.
It won't be. I
Not
promise.
gonna be the last, so. Yeah. All right, friends, we'll see you later.
Thank you.